Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Lifting. Today's episode is being recorded on 2/10/25. I'm here with Ryan pulling cards again, and we are doing an episode more on the D&D lore. Again, the different planes of existence. So before I do anything, I'm now opening this circle to true benevolence with no conflicting agendas as of this moment in time. So thank you. Take it away, Ryan.
Okay, guys, we're back with a new episode about D&D. We're talking about the outer planes, which is sort of other dimensions that are attached to D&D. And as we go, sharing is not on.
Oh, I will put that on. There we go.
All right. So as we go, I will talk about the different planes. But to start, here is sort of a map of the cosmos type thing. And you see that there's multiple planes around the material plane. Then there's the Shadowfell. That's just a dimension of shadows controlled by the one goddess, Shar. Then you have the elemental planes and the Feywild. The Feywild is the fairy world, basically, and everything there is turned upside down, almost very similar to a Alice in Wonderland style place, but it's also extremely dangerous because you don't know what you're going to get. You have evil things like hags and stuff that live there, as well as just like Alice in Wonderland funny little characters. You have evil planes and you have good planes around here, and they're all able to interact in some way. Some of them are at war with each other, other ones aren't. Some of them will battle each other openly and invade each other, and other ones don't. It is a whole hodgepodge of madness, and that is to say the least. So these planes come from the Planescape setting of Dungeons and Dragons, and that is sort of a campaign from a while ago. All of these are places you could essentially go, and you would experience different ways of life, and you'd experience the crazy creatures and stuff that inhabit them. Like Mount Celestia is essentially heaven, and the Nine Hells is hell, lorded over by Asmodeus, the basically first devil, because in D&D there's a difference between devils and demons, which has to do with their alignment in the good, lawful good, lawful evil, chaotic neutral sort of thing. You have Limbo, which is where gods go to die. That's just kind of where they live, where they die at. What you also have in Limbo is you have a lot of Githyanki, which if you play Baldur's Gate 3, you will have ran into the Githyanki. Them and the Mind Flayers kind of go between all these planes because they live in the astral, which is just around even these planes, and they can go in and out of them using magic and technology mixed together. And there's some that are just absolutely chaotic places like Pandemonium, where it gets its namesake. The Abyss is where demons come from. They are just chaotic, evil fiends, and they have hundreds of layers of the Abyss. And there's one layer that just has doors that throw you out in random places. That's the chaotic evil. But there's the upper planes and the lower planes. There's one that's just like a World of Wheels style clockwork mechanic place where these little men who look like clocks that will like go on this like migration thing around all the outer plains will come from. You have some that are just verdant fields. So yeah, this is our topic for tonight, and I'm gonna start by kind of giving a using a different picture than the one I'm currently sharing to share a more in-depth picture.
Yeah, this is just like what I've been talking about the introverse, the worlds within worlds, the different plane layers, the nesting doll, essentially. Also, how Asgard and a few others sit. It's very similar, like in Elder Scrolls, where you have the different planes of Oblivion, or you have like the Isle of Artaeum, or something like that. It's very similar to that. Actually.
Yeah, this is just really in depth. So Sigil is like the city at the center of all of these planes. It's not actually the material plane, but it sits in the center of them and is able to communicate. And it's like a neutral zone within them all where they can all kind of come to make deals and stuff. And the Outlands are just the area around Sigil. But we will start with Elysium because it's at the top, and it's broken up into 4 zones, and they are Shurak, Amoria, Aronia, and Beleriand. And Shurak can also be known as Thessalia, which is a more modern name for it. And that is Thessalia is the fourth and outmost layer of Elysium. It's basically just a great ocean, and was the source and final destination of the river Oceanus, which is some of these plains have rivers that go through multiple of them. The river Styx goes through a bunch of the lower plains, and the river Oceanus starts and ends in Elysium. Uh, and it's just green islands scattered around, collectively known as Avalon. No big land masses exist there. The next layer is up above that is Beleriand. Beleriand, contrary to Aronia, Beleriand was mostly flat with marshes and wetlands stretching inland for miles before larger plants and trees were found. Oceanus formed many island nations inhabited by extraplanar beings. Aronia, the second layer of Elysium, was very mountainous, and many branches of the Oceanus became spectacular waterfalls and tumbling cascades before forming channels bordered by steep cliffs and gray rocks. Like Amoria, Aronia supported abundant wildlife amongst its banks, and in Amoria, the first layer, also referred to as the innermost layer, was connected to the astral plane by color pools and the twin paradises, the happy hunting grounds, and the cordon opposition. By unmarked portals located in dark caverns, divination spells were required to determine the destination of these portals with certainty. Navigating the river Oceanus downstream also led to the happy hunting grounds, but any underground passages were not likely to be safe for boats. Amoria best fit the description given above. And the river Oceanus had many side channels that split and merged back again, creating many banks for the establishment of realms.
That's actually very, very interesting. You know what? I've actually seen looking into some of these different planes, some of these different, not just in the multiverse, but in the introverse and the different dimensional layers. This is actually very similar things I've seen, like different stones, like say Shungite, for instance, or amethyst, or some of these other stones, like that have certain powers to them, come from some of these other planes, like what you're describing for Elysium there. And Elysium is I've always known it as like the spirit world and part of the omniverse, or super omniverse. So the omniverse and super omniverse would fall under some of these. Also, there's another game set called the Champions of Norath that deal with the different elemental planes too. So it's very similar. So, some of the planes that I've seen, even in that game, where you have like different, like in the plane of air, where you see different land masses kind of floating in the air. I've actually seen planes that look like that, and also with not necessarily Elysium, but I have seen other planes where you have the different divides, where, like, say, a river here would flow into or a waterway would flow into a space like that. Some people said that that was the Garden of Eden was that way. I found out that was something different. That was a technological space that was carved out by Enlil, but the reason I bring it up is there are dimensional spaces where rivers will flow right through them, like what you said the river Styx did for this. It's very similar to, if not the same type of thing that I've seen.
All right, the second one we're talking about is the Beastlands. And the Beastlands are also the Happy Hunting Grounds. So that's like you can get to them from Elysium, basically. And it was given to the plane by those that first scried it, which means like viewed it magically. Assuming the abundant and varied game and wildlife would be a sportsman's paradise, but the native inhabitants of this plane were all capable of speech and comparable to humans in range of intelligence. Some of the most intelligent creatures could even wield magic. All natural creatures and their giant versions from the prime material plane, including mammals, birds, fish, reptiles, amphibians, insects, and invertebrates, excluding enchanted creatures and monsters, were represented here. And they called their home the Beastlands. The Beastlands had 3 layers, all heavily forested with normal and giant trees, plants, moss, and fungi. Each layer had its own time of day, which never varied. Weather was regionally distributed and provided all manner of conditions for inhabitants of all creatures. Weather in one region did not affect adjacent regions, so an arid desert could exist next to a snowy winter region, for example. Any attempt to control the winds, weather, and atmosphere was countered by those airborne creatures who lived in the region. Yggdrasil, the world ash, extended its branches to all layers of the Beastlands. The reason was unclear, since there were no realms of the Norse pantheon anywhere in the plane. Some speculated that the wilderness and life-giving properties of the plane were sufficient to root the tree there. The first layer is Krigala, and it's the upper layer connected to the astral plane by the same colorful pools as Elysium has. The river Oceanus flowed in relatively straight course from Amoria in Elysium and through Kergala on its way to Arborea. The sky was perpetually lit by noonday sun directly overhead, regardless of distance traveled. Brooks is the second layer. The second layer of the Beastlands was constantly in dusk or dawn due to the 2 suns on opposite ends of the horizon, hovering there and turning the sky a reddish hue. The landscape of Brooks was similar to that found in Kergala. Brooks was the location of the Library of All Knowledge. And the final layer of the Beastland is Perthura, the bottommost layer where the lands of starlight. Above any clouds or fog that might exist in the region was a clear night sky full of wandering stars. The stars moved randomly, such that all attempts to map them into constellations proved unsuccessful.
That's actually interesting. These different dimensional layers are similar to, or if not the same as the Introverse, where I've even been told by beings like Elaine and Vesa, even Isaac and them, where like Lanulos, for instance, has like a different sky that they would see, but that's why people interpret it as a different planet. Even though they did construct something in a distant galaxy they called Ganymede, that was an aperture opening, or you could say they made like a planetary or planetoid there. Their dimension is very similar to this, and also the Yggdrasil tree is actually, I found out, a representation of the multiverse, or what holds up the world in different dimensions, or like the pillars of the timelines, essentially like you see in the show Loki. It's very similar to that, with the void wrapped in between those timelines. So in the dimensions. So this is pretty close, if not the same, as a lot of things that I've been informed about.
Isgard is the next domain. The heroic domain of Isgard, also referred to as Gladsheim, was the great wheel plane straddling the alignment of chaotic good and chaotic neutral. Like the Greek influence of Arborea, much of this plane was heavily dominated by the gods of the Norse pantheon, who had little interaction with the people of Toril. The primary exception was Tyr, the Norse god of war and law, who became known and widely worshipped as a god of justice. Isgard. The name of this... So Isgard has multiple layers as well, but they're interesting in the fact that one of them is just also known as Isgard.
Yeah, essentially it's Asgard. Yeah. So
Yeah, it even says it. It says the name of this layer, also the name of the Confederation of Gods domains known as Asgard, home of the Norse pantheon, or Isgard in the Nordic tongue. Each realm was the size of a plain empire, and they were drawn together by the proximity of Isgard the World Ash. Like Mount Olympus, Yggdrasil was a multiplanar conduit connecting Gladsheim directly to Niflheim in Hades and alternate prime material planes without passing through the astral plane. Much like the world tree in the world tree cosmology of like real life, the unusual color pools connecting Asgard and the astral plane existed, but were little used. Portals in the guise of wells connected the layers to neighboring planes of Arborea, Limbo, and Corcadant opposition. In addition to Yggdrasil, the Norse gods controlled and carefully guarded a portal directly to the prime material plane where they were the strongest, called the Bifrost or the Rainbow Bridge. Other known realms adjacent to Asgard were Vanaheim, home of the Vanir, Elfheim, fairyland, known for its chaotic elven spirits, and Jotunheim, home of the giants. Muspelheim is one of the other layers technically within Isgard. The earth birds of this layer were reversed, or alternatively, gravity was reversed, so that the flaming side was up and the earthen side down. Surtur, the fire giant, made their home here and guarded the barriers that led to Asgard and its neighboring realms. Nidvaldir, the rivers of the earth were in such close proximity in this layer that the entire sky were filled with fire, making it appear to travelers that they were in underground caverns and passages with a river of fire for a ceiling. And there are mostly good aligned beings in Isgard, but they're pretty chaotic within their good sensibilities. So yeah, that's Isgard. It's basically Asgard and most of the Norse areas, except for a couple that fall into like Hades and other areas.
yeah, that's very interesting. That's pretty much the same as what I've learned about the nine realms and everything. So yeah, this falls under like basically I heard Odin had the world of wheels essentially. Uh, they pretty much created the Bifrost, brought the nine realms together and linked them in through the world tree. So yeah, this is essentially the same thing. So
The next plane is Limbo. The ever changing chaos of Limbo was an outer plane in the Great Wheel cosmology modeled that embodied chaotic neutral alignment. The planes of Warrior's Rest. Oh, okay, that's talking about. So basically, at a certain point, this was reshaped and then reshaped again. So some of these planes were like moved from like the wheel concept that we're in now to like the world tree itself being the way you got to places, and then it was reverted again when with like universal resets.
hmm.
Okay, so Limbo has basically one. It's got multiple layers, but they're all always moving. So they're not layers; they're more like putty that moves. But this is where, like I said, this is where the Gith stay most of the time. And Susanoo, also the Japanese god of Earth, lived there. Indra, the from the Indian pantheon, lived there. A lot of lost gods lived there, and I also believe, what's his name? Gonna come back to me at a weird time. Anubis lives there,
Hmm.
and he sees like the dead gods that whose bodies are there to make sure nobody's like messing with them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Hmm.
All right, pandemonium time. And let's just take a moment to look at this picture that's pandemonium. That is a brain. That is just a slice out of a brain.
Hmm. I'm only seeing the one you've had up so far, the map one.
Oh, wait, is it not the same map
Hmm.
that I have shared right now?
Now
That
the
one?
let's see, it's still doing the share screen. No, it's the same map. Yeah.
Yeah, look at that. That looks like a brain.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, you're right.
All right. So, Pandemonium, the wind-swept depths of Pandemonium was the outer plane associated with chaotic neutral and chaotic evil alignments in the Great Wheel. And an abandoned astral domain according to the world axis cosmology. Some characteristics of the plane were ascribed to the deep caverns in the world tree cosmology model as well, which are also known as the dismal caverns. Pandemonium was made entirely of rock, pierced by innumerable tunnels and caverns. All open space was filled with hollowing winds that carried sound and the sound of every word, shout, or scream uttered in the place. Without adequate protection, beings with hearing were rendered temporarily deaf in a matter of seconds and permanently deaf in a few minutes. Normal fires could not survive, and there was no natural light. Conversation could only be accomplished by shouting at close range. Gravity in Pandemonium always pulled away from the center of any cavern, so a traveler could walk the floor, walls, or ceilings. Streams and rivers would flow along one surface of cave or inexplicably down the middle through the air. Larger caverns were hundreds of thousands of miles deep and tall. The winds there would lift up small humanoids and carry them far away before a dangerous landing.
Hmm. Yeah,
It is terrifying. Yes, it's just an underground maze.
that sounds kind of like a dimensional Agartha, pretty much, or a dimension that's just like a bunch of honeycombs and tunnels and wind and everything, or like a big labyrinth. Yeah. So there have been, me projecting into different spaces, or when I did that a lot more, I did see some weird areas where you could tell where there had been activity a long time ago, and some of them were almost cut out like dimensional mazes, kind of like those that painting with all the dimensional stairs going weird directions and everything too. There was also there's also worlds and planets and everything within those spaces. So with that particular one though, in particular, I did see these weird repositories that were like mazes that had these weird orbs that went through them, these energy currents that would shoot orbs through them and everything, like almost like a breath going in and out of different spaces. So it's very similar, very similar. Hmm.
So there are layers to this one, but all of them just keep saying it's harder to navigate and the air is harder to breathe. Basically, that's all they say.
Hmm. Yeah, I could see why that would be true if it was like anything like the thing I saw. Yeah, yeah, I could see that'd be true.
Now we're going to talk about the Abyss. And the Abyss is a big one because it is where demons come from, and D&D has a very old relationship with devils and demons. In fact, it was a major proponent of like the Satanism scare of the 90s. But the Abyss, the infinite layers of the Abyss, was a birthplace of demons, a chaotic, evil universe unto itself with uncountable layers of infinite variety connected haphazardly. The Abyss's place in the cosmology of the Forgotten Realms has shifted multiple times over throughout its history, but the nature of the plane remained fairly constant. A violent, malevolent place where the strong survived on the backs of the weak. The weak conspired to overthrow the strong. Alliances only lasted when convenient, and the landscape itself tortured the mind and body of all who dared to pass it.
Hmm. Okay, yeah, there are dark dimensions out there. There's even like the void where it's like this. It's not really dark. It's just the spaces in between universes where it can also in some areas like this one tower prison they put certain people in, kind of like a bounty being put out for them. Certain people can access this weird spinning tower that's like these different pieces that flow around each other. It's like a mix between that and the Imperial City from Oblivion, but it's a dimensional space very similar to like that abyss, but it's more gray than black. It's not really an evil dimension, it's just a space. It just is. Now there's other ones that are even worse that would be kind of like the abyss where demons do come and go from. But it's not like a hell like you'd expect it to be. It's more of a passageway where they congregate to go to different dimensional spaces, essentially.
If you're interested in the Abyss, there are some really good YouTube videos directly talking about the Abyss, as well as some of the other layers here, and they're a couple hours long. One of them, I think, is like 4 hours long, and it's dedicated directly to the abyss and all of its different layers.
Hmm.
Some of them are the river Styx goes right through the abyss, and it can bring you between the different layers there. But like, there's evil gods that have a layer to themselves. There's just like, and anyone who dies with a chaotic evil alignment in D&D, which is an alignment's like a system where like it's just to decide the morals and actions of your character, kind of. Anyone who dies with that alignment in D&D will that is their afterlife, is going to the abyss and essentially being reborn as a low level fiend there, a low level demon, and having to claw their way up the food chain in the abyss.
Hmm. Okay, I can kind of see where that would be a thing. Like if you had an entanglement of some kind, you just kind of like rubber band your way back to wherever that the other end of that entanglement is. Um, just like any contract or any deal you would make with, say, a demon or a jinn or something like that, you'd be kind of aligned with like the soul trap version of that or some dimensional version of that. It's not like there's a hell where you go to when you die. It's more like, okay, you've made a deal with these beings, now you're going to where they live, kind of thing. So it's not like the Christian hell, even though it sounds like it. It's more like you've made a Faustian pact with something. It's kind of like in Skyrim.
Well, we'll get to Faustian pacts soon. That they will make deals, but they're not the same as Faustian pacts. Faustian pacts exist in this, and we'll talk to them. We'll talk about them in a couple planes.
Okay.
This is you are just a crazy evil person, and you ended up there because that's how you lived your life,
Hmm.
and you have no recourse now but to either play that plane's game or just continuously keep dying for eternity.
Okay. Hmm.
Kasseri, the Tartarian Depths, also known as Tartarus or Hades, was the outer plane in the Great Wheel cosmology, representing the alignment between chaotic evil and neutral evil, situated within. So Hades is a mix of Tartarus and the Grey Wastes, kind of, and it's one that mixes, and it's been taken out and put back in, but so some of them are there. But the layers here, there are 6 layers in Tartarus, had or Kasseri, which is the proper name, but Tartarus is easier because everyone knows the name Tartarus from Greek mythology, had a seemingly infinite number of worlds arranged like a string of pearls stretching out into the air-filled void. In the top layer, Orthreus, each orb was about the size of a prime material world and averaged about 100 miles from the nearest orb. In each successive lower layer, the planetoids grew smaller and further apart. There was no sun, but the soil of each orb gave off heat and a dull reddish glow, similar to the phosphorescence of beetles. The planets did not rotate, and there was no day or night unless a greater deity wished it so in their realm. Seasons and weather occurred randomly, and what little plant life there was would rapidly mature after rainfall and then wither hours later. Each orb was connected to one specific prime material world. The barriers between layers were always located at the deepest point on each planetoid and always led to the same sphere in the next layer. So the worlds of Tartarus can be imagined as a sphere nested like Russian nesting dolls. Each layer contained a string of orbs of a particular size.
Hmm. Okay, yeah, that's exactly like the introverse, what you're describing. So, where it's the worlds within worlds, it's like the string of them or the nesting doll. Yeah, I nicknamed it the nesting doll. So that this is actually pretty interesting. The parallels between the D&D lore and the actual, not just the introverse, but the creature lore and everything too.
The Grey Wastes of Hades. So Hades connects to the Kiss area. That's where I got it messed up. So Hades is also the Grey Wastes. Was an outer plane, home of demons, not all demons, but some of them, located at the midpoint of the lower planes. It was a plane of evil balance between law and chaos. Description: the 3 layers of Hades were called glooms for the good reason. They were They were called glooms for good reason. They were realms devoid of emotion, hope, and peace. Gray land and gray sky throughout with no sun, moon, or seasons to break the monotony. Any color other than shades of gray would be oblivious against the background. Oh, would be obvious against the background, but would fade to gray in a week or two. And like bright colors, beings would begin to fade also. At first, they would feel the drain of emotions, leaving only sadness and defeatism. In a 10-day or two, they would be trapped in Hades, and their existence would begin to fade until finally they became larvae, which is like the lowest level of beings, where you start up at. Basically, they just become. It's essentially like a larva that was once something. Hades was a unique plane as described by the Great Wheel cosmology because it not only joined to adjacent planes in the Great Wheel, it also held the foundation of Mount Olympus and the roots of Yggdrasil, the World Ash. The two planar artifacts connected Hades to Olympus in the first layer of Arborea and Eastgard, respectively, allowing travel between Hades, the upper planes, and alternate prime material planes without going through the astral plane, much like the world tree in the world tree cosmology. Onios, the first layer of Hades, was named for the lord of the demons, the Ononidaemon, and Tharax, the decayed. Onios was the land of disease with stunted and withered plants amid gray rock terrain. The river Styx flowed through this layer, and there were portals to Tartarus, Gehenna, and the Cordant Opposition that looked like a huge spinning metal coin, visible for miles, often guarded by iron fortresses. Anyone walking this land or floating on the river Styx had a chance of contracting major diseases. Many of the demons and some of the other creatures from the lower middle planes who were immune to disease made their home here. Niflheim. Compared to Onios, the terrain in the second layer was rougher, like foothills with cooler temperatures, heavier vegetation, including pine trees, and no disease. Everything was cloaked in dreary fog and mist, limiting vision to about 100 feet. Yggdrasil's roots reached Niflheim, connecting it to Asgard in Gladsheim. The goddess Shar once maintained an abode here. Shar is the goddess of shadows. Mm-hmm. Pluton, the lowest level of Hades, contained the base of Mount Olympus, a direct conduit through the astral plane to the plane of Arborea. The gray motif continued through this layer, but most of the vegetation was black willow trees and dry, dying poplars.
That's actually quite interesting. Well, they've also blended a lot of the Greek mythological and the Scandinavian mythological. I find that interesting how they just kind of interchange them like that. I find that very fascinating. Okay, yeah, we can move on.
Yeah, D&D, basically all the gods that we have in our real world have some representation, and there's new gods as well. And you just have to know it. If you want to worship them, you can. They all have certain boons that they can give and whatnot. But yeah. Okay, the next plane is Gehenna. The bleak eternity of Gehenna was an outer plane in the Great Wheel cosmology model representing alignment between neutral evil and lawful evil. Life is an exercise in will. Now hold still while I exercise mine, is the Gehenna motto. Description: the 4 layers of Gehenna were infinite planes with gravity at a 45-degree angle to the ground, making travelers feel as if they were on the side of a mountain with no base or peak. Anyone losing their footing could tumble for miles before finding enough purchase on a slope to half their fall. Nearly all terrain that was not a river or of water or lava was slightly slippery to quite slick. All structures were either built onto or carved into the slopes. Heat and light came from the ground, much like Tartarus, but the source was volcanic. Lava flows, vents, turmoils, and mud pots were common. Earthquakes and volcanic eruptions occurred often, tearing the land apart. On the hotter layers, unprotected, flammable items and creatures would catch fire from the ground, from the glowing ground, or superheated gases being ejected. The barrier between layers were almost always underground, usually in dead-end corridors.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting that you said the dead end corridors. That's another thing that was said to be like a thing with hell with like repeating rooms and stuff like that. You see in Loki where like the repeating room would go over and over, and then there's another one where it'd be dead end corridors, kind of like the Winchester house where doors led to nowhere. Gehenna is actually another word for hell in Hebrew. So I find that interesting. They chose that as one of the planes. But yeah, the dead end corridors thing, I've seen that before where different dimensions will represent themselves that way, trying to get you lost or trapped, kind of like the proverbial Winchester house of dimensional spaces. Hmm.
Okay, now we're going to talk about the layers there because they're just interesting. Kahalas, the uppermost layer, was the most livable of the four plains, with many waterfalls cascading down its slopes, and the largest being the river Styx. The Styx followed a rough path down the slopes, fell for thousands of feet, and ran twisting rapidly before disappearing into underground passages. Steam rose into the infinite and empty black skies, making the rising glow a dull red. Kahalas touched the astral plane and had connections to Hades, the Nine Hells, and Karkatan opposition. The portals appeared as black chasms in the floor of deep underground caverns. While there was no way of telling where these would lead, intelligent travelers had made markings on the walls, and many of them indicated portal destinations if one knew to read them. The second layer of Gehenna was the most violently active layer when it came to lava cascades, thousands of miles wide and city-sized. Kahamadra is how it's pronounced, was foul with arid smoke for miles at a time above the surface and would cause blindness to unprotected eyes and had the effect of a stinking cloud on the lungs. Below ground, the air was fresher but stank of burning flesh and hair.
Hmm. Okay, yeah, that's definitely like a hell. So,
Mungoth was the land of falling ash, burning snow, and furnace. The furnaces of this layer were fewer and farther apart, allowing ice and snow to build up in the darkest places between active areas. Travelers had to brave the never-ending avalanches and of wet snow and fiery rock. Underground passages were relatively safe.
hmm, that's
And
interesting.
the final layer of Gehenna, which I just think is cool. I mean, that's why I kept going with the layers here. Is Krongath. The fourth layer was devoid of any volcanic activity, even underground. All was dark and cold. The name of this layer literally means dead furnace.
Hmm. Or basically when hell froze over kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, so that was actually a gag somebody put in there. Like I thought that's actually quite interesting. I've seen dimensional layers that are dead, like there should be heat or light there. But yeah, I think that's pretty funny how they did it. It's kind of their version of when hell froze over. Yeah. Hmm.
Now, we have the nine hells of Beator, sometimes shortened to the hells or just Beator. It was home to the devils, the plane that embodied lawful evil. It was the plane of sinister wickedness and institutional cruelty, its denizens organized into a strict caste system with a very rigid chain of command. Each of the nine hells had its own physical laws or properties of matter, but all were inhospitable or deadly to outsiders. From the boiling rivers of fluid in Avernus to the sheer crags of Nessus, a body'd be hard pressed to find a place that sums up the cold cruelty of the multiverse more than Beator.
That
Just like if you die as an evil, crazy bastard, you go to the abyss. If you die as like a lawful person that was still evil, you go to Beator, or you go to Beator if you made deals with devils and they got your soul.
oh, that's where the Faustian Pact thing came in. Then.
Yeah, costume packs are in D&D. You literally like they write up a magical contract. You can read it if you want and get out of it, or and like redo it. Most people don't read it because they usually come like as you're about to die. So yeah. So the cool thing about this plane is this is the most well explored plane, really, by most people. In fact, there's a whole campaign called Descent into Avernus, which brings you to the first layer, and that's just the first of 9 crazy layers. Also, the demons of the abyss and the devils of Beator are in something called the Blood War, where they just kind of fight and invade each other often. Most of it takes place in the first layer of Avernus and Beator, but sometimes it'll spill over into the Abyss. So, each of the 9 hells was unique and usually mirrored the malevolent characteristics of its ruler, or perhaps the archdevils were shaped by the domains they schemed to control. No one can be certain. In either cosmology, each hell was a separate, infinitely layered, rigidly joined to its neighbors by barriers that fixed them in location. After the spell plague, the domains of the archdevils were described as territories, large but finite, or circles. The relationship between layers and circles are not fully known. What follows are descriptions of the 9 hells reported from different cosmological models that have been collated and summarized. Trade. The inhabitants of the 9 hells produce goods exported across the plains, including the planar city of Dor's Sigil. That's basically where you can go to get all these, as we said before. Green Beator ore and steel smelted from it was mined in Avernus. Another notable export was Beator's own whiskey. It was a pleasantly smelling, steaming hot drink that resembled boiling gold blow. When consumed, it burned one's stomach with sweet pain. Very few mortals could stomach even a single shot. Avernus, the first circle of hell, was also the topmost because astral travelers would emerge from the color pools on this layer, and reaching the next circle required descending to the lower depths to breach a barrier to Dis. According to the Great Wheel cosmology, this layer was also connected by portals to Acheron, Gehenna, and Cordon opposition by the World Tree cosmology. You could also get to Clangor, the Barrens of Doom and Despair, and the Blood Rift via the River of Blood. It was believed at the time that some of the archdukes maintained portals to the realms of Bane, Loviar, and Tolana, but other ownership and location of these portals were unknown, basically because some of these are gods' planes that now don't exist anymore. The world axis cosmology model poises the 9 hells were isolated with no direct connections except via the river Styx to Abyss. Travelers on the astral sea who did not follow the Styx likely found themselves falling out of the sky above Avernus to a fiery death. By all accounts, Avernus was a desolate wasteland with rocky terrain, sparse twisted vegetation, concealed snake pits, caves, and warrens, volcanoes, and rivers of magma. The sky was starless, full of choking smoke, and glowed a dark red due to balls of flammable gas that floated about and streaked across the atmosphere, randomly exploding as a fireball spell. During the Blood War, Avernus echoed with the marching of legions of devil troops preparing for their next campaign against the demons of the Abyss. The ground was littered with the dead of the countless battles, and blood trickled out of the ground in veins like streams, eventually flowing into the Styx. Dis, the second circle of hell, described as its own layer, was a flat, barren plain containing little more than black, stagnant rivers stretching for thousands of miles until it reached some rolling hills. The sky was a cloudy, dull green, shot through with lightning. In the center of this plain rose the iron city of Dis, several miles in height and hundreds of miles wide. The foul rivers radiated from a moat big enough to be called a lake surrounding the iron city. The World Tree view of the iron city was much the same but bigger, having been expanded by countless minions following Dispater's grand plan. Dispater is the ruler of that layer. Prisoners of war, tormented underlings, criminals, and kidnapped victims were kept in the underground dungeons where where the wails and woes could be heard filtering up through the small vents in the iron walls. Above it all rose the iron tower where dissipators sat and schemed untouchable. The third layer, Minaros. Minaros was as a layer was described as an endless bog of vile pollution, decaying bodies, and rotting marshes, repeatedly drenched by rain, sleet, and hailstorms. The soggy, bone-stew, disease-ridden swamplands made movement very difficult, and was only broken occasionally by serpentine ridges of volcanic rock. Nameless creatures, even the devils, feared inhabited the swamps. Minoros, as a realm, was depicted as a broad, low-vaulted cavern connected to Dis. An oily water paracoated the roof of the cave and rained down upon the swamps, deserts of mud and oozing black soil, pockmarked with bubbling firmoils and mud geysers. Minoros was also the name of the city built of black stone by Mammon and on the treacherous surface of this place. Only the ceaseless efforts of thousands of minions and slaves prevented the city from sinking and being consumed by the bog. The city of Youngler Hitler, also known as the City of Chains, hung by massive links of chains above the Noisian Fen and was ruled by another devil named Kaintos.
Hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, the first layer kind of almost sounded like blue. It sounds more like Oblivion actually, with the different layers too, but the different Daedric lords. But yeah, that's interesting that they have cities within some of those layers too. I noticed there was a spot within the actual Introverse where there's been some desolated dimensional worlds that are very similar to what you just described, where they had cities of people that were they're more devil-like looking, and it's more like they're demonic-esque, but they're actually bound to the essence of like that particular dimensional world. Some people in certain circles like to call it the eighth sphere, but it's more of like where they say devils and astral type beings come from. It's kind of similar to this layer of this particular layer. So
The next layer is Stygia. No, it's Phlegetos. Sorry, I skipped one. The fourth circle was the hell that most resembled the stereotype of the fiery world of eternal damnation, filled with active volcanoes, rivers of liquid fire, molten rock, ash hills, smoking pits, unbearable heat, all racked by tremors and earthquakes. Even the air seemed aflame, and thus Phlegetos was considered to be fire dominant. The world axis view had it as a cavern several miles below Minoros, where burning lava poured out of fissures in the ceiling. The city of Arberikmok was the seat of power in this realm, built of hardened magma, obsidian, and crystal in the caldera of an extinct volcano, which provided visitors some protection from the elemental environment found throughout the rest of the plain. Stygia, the complete opposite of Phlegetos. Stygia was either a bottomless ocean covered by an ice sheet up to 3 miles thick, or a frozen sea salted with huge icebergs buried in a cavern several miles below Dis and hundreds of miles away from fiery Phlegetos. Depending on which cosmological model was in vogue at the time, according to the Great Wheel and World Tree, the river Styx cut across the ice, forming a channel. The other model suggested that the Styx supported small but hardy plants and mosses, which, after millennia of decay, this vegetation resulted in swampy areas along the banks of the river. A few floating islands were the only non-frozen ground in Stygia, their peaks wreathed in lightning arcing from the coal-black sky, where lightning struck at strange phenomenon called cold fire erupted. White flames of extreme cold that burned for a short time, then disappeared without a trace. The great city of Tantlin was built upon one of these islands, in the curve of the swampy Styx, or perhaps on a giant ice floe. Due to the proximity of the Styx, Tantlin was a cross-planar trading post for those brave enough to attempt navigating the treacherous river.
hmm, that's interesting. Yeah.
Malbolge. There is a significant disagreement between cosmologies on the nature of the sixth circle of hell. As a great wheel layer, Malbolge was a gargantuan tumble of angular black stone blocks, each block ranging in size from a small city to a large metropolis, that formed a pile hundreds of miles thick. The randomly tilted and ill-fitting blocks were honeycombed with angular passages and caverns, causing non-flying travelers to frequently need mountaineering skills and risk avalanches. Stinking clouds of vapor rose up from the depths and lit the sky with the color of blood, causing cosmologists to speculate that the blocks of Malbolge may have rested on infinite sea lava, corroborating reports that have been heard of flammable materials left on the ground spontaneously combusting. Most habitations in Malbolge were copper-clad fortresses built from black stone. The world tree view of this layer was similar to the Great Wheel Plain of Gehenna, a steep, infinite craggy incline often subject to avalanches that crushed most anything that got in the way. The copper-shod redoubts were a teardrop shape, were otherwise engineered to deflect tumbling boulders. But even those could not withstand a direct hit from a major avalanche. In the world axis cosmology view, Malbolge was another huge cavern connected to Stygia by icy canals that ran hundreds of miles below reaching their destination. A formal godly inhabitant had shaped the realm into a vast garden with fountains, towers, reflecting pools, and all manner of landscaping delights. With the coming of the devils, Malbolge was still beautiful on the surface, but creeping corruption permeated the realm, twisting the beauty and perverting the architecture and poisoning the pools. Maladomini. The Great Wheel cosmology view of the seventh circle of hell described it as having vapor-polluted skies similar to Malbolge, but the surface was solid. The post-Spellplague view described Maladomini as a colossal maze of passages, each several miles across, that eventually led to Khania. Malbolge and Nessus, all three models, agreed the seventh hell was filled with ruins of old cities, stagnant rivers, exhausted and abandoned quarries and strip mines, stone aqueducts and lava canals, decaying fortresses, swamps of biting flies, and black pools of ichor that erupted from the ground. The Lord of the Seventh was never satisfied with construction of his capital and repeatedly built and abandoned city after city. The largest and most beautiful was Malagard, a sprawling metropolis, palace, fortress, arcology with myriad black towers linked by tangled webs of bridges and walkways. Malagard was rumored to contain 1,000,000 rooms and to cap an equally complex dungeon labyrinth.
Okay, yeah, a lot of this sounds familiar. I'm seeing it in my head as you're talking, and Isaac has made reference to like the many worlds of our solar system. I believe this is what he was actually referring to, was these different types of dimensional spaces and layers. This was quite a while ago when he mentioned this, but yeah, this does seem familiar to me.
The next layer, Khania. Both pre- and post-Spellplague cosmologies agreed that Khania was a bitterly cold, dormant realm of solid ice mountains, titanic, unnaturally fast-moving glaciers, and nearly continuous snowfall that made Stygia seem balmy by comparison. Unprotected travelers were exposed to temperatures of negative 60 degrees Fahrenheit. But on the positive side, there were few creatures that hunted in the icy wastes. Earlier, lore described the great citadel Mephistar as being constructed of iron, but later reports say that the Lord of the Eight's fortress palace was made of ice. All accounts seem to argue that the tower had a heated, luxurious interior and sat atop a gargantuan glacier called Nargos, whose speed and movement were under the control of Mephistopheles himself. He's got such a hard name to pronounce when reading it.
Yeah, exactly. I found out Mephistopheles and Lucifer were actually what was it, Alalu in Sumerian mythology, and then of course Loki. There was one the Lucifer was Loki. So in Scandinavian. So yeah, it's very interesting where in some of my channelings and in some of the sessions I've had where I've actually seen some of these beings dealing or harming people from some of these different dimensional layers like this. So like if it's something, not that I'm saying Mephistopheles in particular, I'm just saying a being, but I've seen some things very similar to this.
And the final layer is Nessus. The ninth and deepest hell was a land of extremes in the Great Wheel View, regions of cold as Cania, volcanoes like Phalegdos, and a lake of ice and a flaming forest of sheer cliffs. The citadel and a citadel even larger than Kil-Onin in Hades, where Hades lives. The World Tree View did not contradict this description of Nessus, but focused more on the blasted and torn landscape out of which rose Malshim, the citadel of hell. It is said that Malshim could hold millions of devils within its mountainous edifice, from the lowest warrens deep in the trench to the soaring spires miles above the tortured plain. The world axis model agrees that the progression of rifts, pits, and chasms led down and down, forming a vertical maze hundreds of miles that contained great cities, fiendish armies, and mighty fortresses of the overlord Asmodeus.
Asmodeus, I've actually, yeah, that's one of that's one of the main arch demons, Asmodeus. I actually encountered one years ago that called himself that, where he was this big monstrous demon type that actually influenced people from a dimensional plane very similar to this. So there are archdemons. They're a dimensional reptilian monster looking thing that some people like to call them Hyper Draco, but that's not entirely accurate. They're more like the archdemons, the biblical type, like you're hearing, where they're in a dimensional space and they actually do harm from their space and leach into ours. Kind of like almost like Hermaeus Mora was for Apocrypha in Skyrim, or like Molag Bal for the Cold Harbor, or the Marin's Dagon for his lair. So it was like, it's very similar. Yeah.
Okay, now Acheron, the infinite battlefield of Acheron, the next plane, was an outer plane in the Great Wheel myth cosmology representing a line between lawful evil and lawful neutral, with emphasis on law. Some characteristics of this plane were ascribed to the World Tree cosmology of Klangor, Nishrek, and Warrior's Rest. When that cosmology became popular, Nishrek and Warrior's Rest survived the spell playing and became part of the World Axis view. Acheron was the bridge between the ultimate order of Nirvana and the regimented evil of the Nine Hells, and as such, each layer emphasized order over evil. The land masses on each layer were blocks of geometric simplicity, the size of nations, floating in a sea of the air. The blocks would slowly collide and part without causing any upheaval or tremor, allowing beings to move to a new block if desired. The dance of the blocks was carefully orchestrated, and creatures of high intelligence could usually discern a pattern for an area by studying the motions. It was said gravity pulled towards the center of the blocks, but in particular times, gravity was normal to each surface. Okay, the first layer. How many layers are here? Okay, 4. Avas. Acheron was sometimes known as the iron-shod battle plains of Acheron due to the characteristics of the first layer, Avalas. The blocks of the top plane were black, with a metallic hardness that allowed the sound of battle and troop movements to reverberate loudly. Avalas was the most block-like world, and the highest population of the armies of the Outer Planes spent their afterlife clashing in neutral territory over differences both subtle and gross. The landscape consisted of cone-shaped mountains and pits, plus the iron fortresses of various armies. The only remarkable feature of this layer was the river Styx, that would bubble up from one pit, meander across 2 or 3 sides of a block, and then disappear down another pit. The sticks did not visit all the blocks, but those it did could be reached by Charon and his servants. Avalos touched the astral plane and had spherical portals to the three adjacent planes, Nirvana, the Nine Hells, and the concordant opposition. The portals hung at fixed locations in space and would pass harmlessly through the blocks, becoming inactive while inside a block and reactivating when they reappeared. Anyone emerging from a portal would start to fall towards the nearest block and almost certainly require some form of flight to avoid a high velocity impact. The portals were activated by touch, and the destination could be determined by the sound it made when activated. A harmonious chord indicated a portal to Nirvana, a dissonant chord meant the Nine Hells, and a silence indicated the concordant opposition.
Interesting. Yeah, the different harmonics. Yeah, different harmonics can open different portals to different places. Like there's even a gate or a portal, famous one in Peru called the Gate of Amaramuru, where it requires a certain whistle tone to open it. The monks would use it to escape to a different plane, or travel to a different plane if they had to. That's where they said some of the Peruvian people went down there. That's where some of the also some of the Inca disappeared. That's what they claim they went to. So yeah, I find that very interesting. Where it's just like I say, they could do a chirping noise. Kind of sounds like the communicator on the old Star Trek, where they could make this noise. And they even showed, Roddenberry even showed something like that, where they showed Kirk opening his communicator one time and opening a door to an ancient monolithic weapon that was in Star Trek, where he hit his head on a panel and lost his memory. But the reason I bring that up is it's still representative of a doorway or a conduit. And in that case, they used it as a physical manifestation. But there are these metaphysical or these dimensional manifestations where they can actually do exactly what you were just explaining.
Okay, the next layer is Thuldanin. The layer was the Sargesto Sea, elephant graveyard, and scrap heap for countless contraptions, creations, weapons, armor, failed experiments, broken devices, fallen buildings, and shipwrecks of sea and air. The blocks of Thuldanin were hollow and pockmarked with pits that led to the interior a few miles down. There the flotsam and jetsam of the ages turned to stone in a matter of days or weeks due to the magic of the lair. Thuldanin had no inhabitants, only the occasional visitor from Avalos looking for some piece of magic or technology that might turn the tide of their battle.
That's interesting. You equated that with the elephant's graveyard. I came to find out the real place is there's an opening in Africa. I think it's called Drakensberg, or Drakensgard is the name of the place, and it's actually where it's a dragon's graveyard and not necessarily elephants. And they would dimensionally pass in and out of that place. It was a fight between Inca and Enlil that actually destroyed that dragon hub. But they equate that to the elephant's graveyard, where they show it's the elephants of Timbuktu, basically going from where they would travel to migrate to a graveyard. I found out elephants are a type of dragon, and there's this being I ran into by the name of Wamusa one time. I found out he was actually a Marvel Comics character that somebody had written him in as a Marvel Comics character, big elephant deity that hated poachers apparently in the comics. But in that realm, I came to find out that he's actually more of a dragon form, and that's where some dragon forms go in and out, as like that elephant's graveyard type of setting. So it's interesting. There's one that's also in here.
The next layer is Tinebulus. The third layer of Acheron had blocks different than those of other layers. Here the blocks were made of gray volcanic stone, and the faces were six-sided, eight-sided, or even higher in number of edges. When the blocks of Tinebulus collided, the surfaces would fracture along natural fault lines into hexagons, great and small. This layer had no inhabitants, but was attractive to magical researchers for its emptiness and isolation. Acanthus. Oh, do you have something to say?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Acanthus. The blocks of the fourth and final layer were square and so razor thin as to be almost two-dimensional. They ranged in size from a few inches or centimeters to several miles across. Both sides of the hard black squares had normal gravity pulling to the surface and could be walked upon. Being hit by the edge of one of these razor sharp squares could be deadly.
Interesting. Oh, yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. The clockwork nirvana of Mechanus, sometimes just called nirvana, was an outer plane representing the alignment of lawful neutral and home of the Modrons. And just to share what the Modrons look like, because they're these clockwork things and I think they look cool. Do you see this picture
Yep.
of these weird clockwork creatures?
Yeah. Those little automaton, like, yeah.
Yep. They are the things I say go on like a pilgrimage around all the planes like once every certain amount of years.
Hmm. That's interesting. They're kind of like the dwarven automatons a little bit in their own weird way. Yeah, with more of a tribal-esque like look to them. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So back to, let me find that picture. Where is it? Where is it? There it is. Okay. Okay. This plane was filled with an infinite number of country-sized circular interlocking gears, which were inhabitable on one or both sides. These great flat wheels were at least 1,000 miles in diameter and had teeth that meshed at right angles, all turning slowly in synchronicity. Each disc had its own gravity that operated in a sphere, circumscribing it exactly and pulling normal to the top and bottom surfaces. The void between the gears was filled with air, allowing each flight outside a gravity sphere. Objects would feel very weak attractions to nearby disks. A plane of law and order, Nirvana had equal amounts of light and dark, heat and cold, and equal measures of the four elements. There was a place for everything, and everything was in its place. Even individuals living here existed to fit into the greater scheme of things and thus achieve a perfect society. There was no pain, but there was the only pleasure was in successfully filling a role like a gear in a machine. Passion, fantasy, and illusion did not exist here except for what might be brought by visitors, and any who tried to ferment individualism or stir passions for a cause soon found they were not well received. Nirvana was connected to the prime material plane via the astral plane and the outer planes of Arcadia, Acheron, and the concordant opposition, by portals which appeared once every revolution of the gears. They belonged to the period of the rotation depended on the size of the gear, but the typical period was 20 days. The portals stayed open for exactly 1 day. There was one portal to concordant opposition located at the center of the featureless bottom side of a large gear that was continuously open.
Hmm. Yeah, I haven't seen one that's that strict on balancing a society, but I'm being told that there is something very similar to that, where they would not receive outsiders well, and it would disrupt their flow of their society. Yeah. Hmm.
The next plane is Arcadia. The peaceful kingdoms of Arcadia was the outer plane representing alignments between lawful neutral and lawful good. In the Great Wheel cosmology, some characteristics of this plane were ascribed to the world tree, planes of Dwarfholm, Hopes of the Triad, and Dwemerhart. Where that cosmology became popular, Dwarfholm and the houses of Triad, which became known as Celestia, survived the spell plague and became part of the world axis cosmology. Dwemerhart was destroyed at the start of the spell plague.
But you said that was the dwarven home
That's
basically.
what they're calling it, as a dwarf home, but that doesn't mean they actually came from there.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's why at first I thought it was going to be like the World of Wheels kind of setting, but yeah, that's interesting.
Arcadia connected seven heavens, Nirvana, the Corcadon opposition, by portals made of either white ivory or black steel, shaped like flower trestles. These portals were in few number but rested at fixed locations in the first layer. Little is known about the other two layers. El Bialo was the first layer of Arcadia. In the Great Wheel cosmology, an endless stretch of orderly plains dotted with a few mountains and hills. It contained the divine realms of Clagadinge, Silverbeard, and Marduk. Oh, okay, it's where dwarven gods live.
Ah, okay. That's yeah, the Clyde Silver. Yeah, that I remember you talking about it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The one
The
previous.
Nexus was the second layer of Arcadia in the Great Wheel cosmology. It contained the divine realms of Azulth, Savaras, as well as Heliopolis, and shared divine realm of Horus Re, Isis, Osiris, and Ra of the ancient Egyptian pantheon, because I don't know how to pronounce that word. Mulhorandi, maybe?
Yeah. Oh, it sounds about right. Yeah.
Nemesis, in the Great Wheel cosmology, Nemesis was moved to Mechanicus and was no longer the third layer of Arcadia. Orb of Day and Night. The Orb of Day and Night was a great sphere placed atop Arcadia's highest peak, with one half glowing and the other half dark. It rotated evenly and continually, at all times illumining one half of the infinite plane and leaving the rest in natural darkness. This caused day-night in Arcadia, though there were no twilight, just day and night.
Hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, you brought up the Egyptian pantheon. Those are generally people consider them to be like the harbingers of knowledge, but they're actually more of harbingers of doom. They were more of the you have Isis and Osiris were essentially Ninlil and Enlil from the Scandinavian or not Scandinavian Sumerian pantheon. But yeah, I find that quite interesting that they had a layer for the dwarves, and then that one of those middle layers was for the Egyptian group. This sounds vaguely familiar to me, where I've seen again different beings that I talk to on a regular basis, like Crumb and the rest of them, are reaching out from these different layers that happen to have their entry locations in familiar spots on Midgard or on the Earth here.
All right, the next plane is a big one. This is like the other big one, like the Hells. And that's Mount Celestia. The seven heavens of Mount Celestia, also called the seven mountains of goodness and law, seven mounting heavens of Celestia, or seven heavens, was the pinnacle of lawful goodness in the Great Wheel cosmology. The seven heavens were dedicated to the goodness shaped by law and justice, tempered with mercy. Some characteristics of this plane were ascribed to the world tree of cosmology planes of green fields and the house of the triad. When that cosmology became popular in the world axis cosmology, Celestia was interpreted as an astral domain ruled over by Torm as it drifted through the astral sea. Torm is like the god of paladins, like the divine good. Description. Celestia was an ultimate in law and good. All aspects of Celestia were beautiful and perfect. It was where the souls of many creatures of lawful good alignment went after death. Celestia was home to numerous celestial creatures, including various types of archons, angels, and petitioners of this plane. Petitioners are basically people that die and go to one of these planes, and then they become a creature of those planes. As an outer plane, Celestia was spatially infinite and consisted of seven infinite layers, or subplanes. The seven individual layers formed a colossal mountain that rose from an infinite sea of holy water at the bottommost layer. The summit of the topmost layer, ascending the mountain, was analogous to traveling through subsequently higher or deeper layers to the top. Each of the seven layers contained at least one mountain or high structure rising onto the sky, and most had whole mountain ranges. The barriers between the seven layers were arranged at such the entrances, where the lowest geographical point and exist at the highest in the layer below. So a traveler from the astral plane would climb the first layer at the base of a mountain, actually in the surf of the ocean surrounding the mountain, and had to climb to its peak to reach the next layer, only to emerge at the nadir again. The sky of each layer had its own hue, which softly bathed everything in gentle shades of luminance. In a ring around the great mountain, there were three smaller mountains, lesser peaks of Celestia. These were Martyrdom, True Heart, and the Court, and were the domains of the gods Ilmater, Torm, and Tyr, respectively. Yeah, Tyr has land in Isgard and in Celestia.
Ah, okay. I was wondering why he was in both places.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's got like this distinct thing where he has holdings in Celestia and Eastgard, and then sometimes when he's not in Eastgard, the dragon god of justice Bahamut
Yeah.
will live there too.
Oh, yeah. I remember Bahamut. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Celestia's first bottommost layer shared borders with the neighboring plains of peaceful kingdoms of Arcadia and the twin paradises of Bytovia, which we'll talk about next. Travel is possible between Celestia and these plains at certain locations. This plain is called Lunia. Known as the Silver Heaven, Lunia was the first layer travelers encountered. The sky of Lunia was a nighttime sky filled with stars that illuminated the layer with a silver glow. The color pools of the astral plane would deposit visitors in the surf of a vast ocean, the Silver Sea, full of clean, fresh water that had the properties of holy water. The sky above Lunia was perpetually dark, filled with beautiful constellations of silver stars, bright enough to illuminate the base of the mountain. Dark, starry Silver Sea was full of many good aquatic beings, including celestial whales and sea elves. The adjacent beach belonged to an island with a majestic mountain, decorated with a grand citadel made from polished white stone. Descriptions of the citadel varied among travelers, leading cosmologists to theorize that there were many of these mountain islands. Also, in the surf of Lunia were the portals of the twin paradises, Arcadia and the Concordant Opposition, which were large, permanent, freestanding blocks of finished stone, black granite blocks veined with gold led to Arcania, white granite blocks veined with silver to the twin paradises, and red granite blocks flecked with blue took you to the Concordant Opposition. Travelers merely had to touch a block to activate the portal. Lunia was the location of a number of godly realms, including Tyr's secondary realm of the court. Okay, Mercuria. The second layer, Mercaria, was known as the Golden Heaven because of a warm golden light suffused everywhere. This layer contained the armory of the noblest warriors who came here for their eternal rest. If necessary, Mercuria was the marshalling ground of the armies of heaven. Gentle hills and lush green valleys comprised this layer, which was also dotted with small settlements of Acherons and other good aligned beings. Mercaria was known for its great tombs and monuments to noble fighters and paladins resting on the lair. These warriors were honored during the annual Day of Memory. Bahamut's jeweled palace moved about the first four layers of Celestia. It was made entirely of Bahamut's enormous treasure hoard, with walls made of mithril and windows comprised of huge gemstones. Inside, seven great worms closely guarded the huge hoard of amassed treasure.
Hmm. That, as you were talking, I was seeing like people passing through this like odd, like not I want to say void, but this odd like dark hallway, and then emerging into a chamber with like a mass amount of treasure and this giant dragon, like guarding like this big palace. So that's when you mentioned Bahamut's horde there. I saw that before you actually said it. So I thought that's actually pretty interesting.
Venya, the third heaven, also called the Pearly Heaven, or the Heaven of Pearls, was a lush and verdant land with crops, meadows, moors, hills, and rolling countryside, all bathed in the slow glow from a sky reminiscent of the luster of white pearls. It was somewhat colder than the previous two layers. Its slopes often seemed covered with gentle layer of snow. Peaceful brooks and carefully terraced fields were common in Venya. In the Great Wheel cosmology, the Halfling pantheon made their home in Venya, in the realm of the green fields. It was a place of safety for many halflings that lived there. Their crops always gave plentiful harvest, and there was no large predators to speak of. Essentially, it's the Shire.
Hmm. That's what I was thinking too. It was the Shire and the Hobbits. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I was thinking. Yeah.
Solonia. Solonia, the fourth layer, had a sky that glowed like burnished silver and was called the Electrum Heaven, or sometimes the Crystal Heaven. Its valleys were enveloped in mist, fog, and strange scents. The peaks were home to numerous holy shrines, including monstrosities and magnificent cathedrals controlled by demigods. Many of the slopes were rich in precious ores and minerals and were mined by populations of dwarves that resided there. Many pilgrims came questing to the roof of this layer in hopes of finding answers to life's persistent questions. In the Great Wheel cosmology, the vast dwarven mansion called Arakinor was located on the slopes of Salonia, where the dwarven deity Mordarin made his domain. His wife, Baranar Truesilver, was the location with his wife Baranar Truesilver. There was a location of giant soul forges with which Mordarin was said to use to temper the spirits of his people. Ouroboros, the gates of wisdom, the airborne jail of Jazarin of the Kotal, floated above the mountainside of Solania. That's a different. I don't know why that was in the same sentence, but I guess it was. I don't know what that means.
Oh, you're fine. Yeah, that's good.
That's D&D has such a long history of things that unless you know spend your entire life doing it, you're never gonna get it all.
You don't know all the actual
Yeah.
implications and stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Mertian. With a sky not too different from Solania's, the fifth layer was known as the Platinum Heaven. Vast plains and savannas served as the mustering ground for paladins and other lawful good servants. Instead of mountains, Mertian had majestic citadels and huge black spherical domes dotting the plains. Access to the next higher layer was found at the top of the domes. The city of Empiria, also known as the City of Tempered Souls, was located on the edge of a cold mountain lake. It was known to host many magical fountains with powerful healing properties, as well as many hospitals and expert healers. Jovar. The sixth layer, Jovar, was known as the Glittering Heaven or the Heaven of Gems. Its hills were studded with precious gemstones that glittered in light. The layer was actually a vault-lined floor to ceiling, with huge rubies and garnets that gave off a glow like a hearth fire. A seemingly unending ziggurat was the home of the Jovarian Echerons and guarded the entrance to the seventh heaven, known as Yesteria. The heavenly city, the huge seven-layered ziggurat displayed a large staircase on each face connecting the terraces to each other. The stones that made up the city were made of precious gemstones similar to those around the surrounding hills. On the topmost terrace was a bridge to Al-Sinal formed of pure light, where the portal to the topmost layer of Celestia, Cronias, was located. It is guarded by a powerful solar named Zerona, who judged who was allowed to enter. Cronias, the topmost and final layer of Celestia, was called the Illuminated Heaven. Little was known of its structure because nothing was ever recorded by the few who had visited and returned. The legend said that Cronias was so good and lawful that it glowed of its own accord, and any who entered had all evil neutrally burned off them, leaving them inherently good, if they survived. Many religions made this level the home of their lawful good deities, believing any lesser realms were merely to accommodate less worthy souls. It was thought that to be an ultimate goal of the inhabitants of Celestia to ascend the layers one by one in order to reach Cronias, where the souls would join the essence of the plane itself.
That's interesting. It's Cronios, and it's similar to the word Kronos, like the Titan god. I thought that's very interesting. Like the top of the Titan pecking order. Yeah, that's very interesting. And there are realms out there that will kind of skim attachments off of you, while other ones won't. There's some beings that will pass through different dimensions with technology and utilize that realm's energy to bombard you too, like Draco have been known to do that from time to time. But there are realms that will literally rip attachments off you. There's pieces of land here, like when we went to Spirit Lake and encountered the forest people there. They literally would clean you off as you went in. So there's different realms where different beings will do the same to you. That's one of the only groups of forest people I ever saw that actually had their own like realm within a realm there. Where they would skim all the garbage off of you as you entered and wouldn't allow entities, enemies, or even military to enter there. No.
All right, and our final plane is Bitopia. The twin paradises of Bitopia were two layers that formed one of the outer planes in the Great Wheel cosmology, representing alignment between lawful good and neutral good. Some characteristics of this plane were ascribed to the World Tree cosmology planes of the Golden Hills and the House of the Triad. When the cosmology became popular, the Golden Hills became part of Arvendor after the Spell Plague, and the Houses of Triumph became known as Celestia, as described by the World Axis cosmology. The two layers of this plane were joined at one barrier which happened to span the entire sky about 10 miles. Above sea level, gravity for each layer was normal for that layer, but switched direction as soon as one crossed the barrier. Inhabitants of one layer could look up and see the other layer hanging upside down high overhead. Several mountains reached the crossover point for a few met mountains rising up on the other side, allowing careful climbers a way to reach the other layer. Also, the space between layers was filled with air, allowing flight from one side to the other. Each layer glowed with a golden white light. Dothion. Dothion was the bucolic land of old forest and huge meadows, subject to mild seasonal changes and gentle weather. Portals to the seven heavens, Elysium, and the concordant opposition, which is also known as the Outlands, were found in caverns as brightly glowing patterns. Concentric circles for the seven heavens, radiating lines for Elysium, and both patterns superimposed, which resembled a spider web for the concordant opposition. Travelers from the astral plane would emerge from the color pools on this layer. Sharak, across the barrier, Sharak had much the same landscape features, but much harsher weather. Summers were hot and winters were long and cold. Storms were common here, with booming thunder and heavy rains. Life on Sharak was more challenging and kept inhabitants busy, but both sides were virtuously industrious.
Mm. Yeah, it looks like from the picture where it's like almost like a mirror image. I've seen planes that are mirror images where you even have like cities like that are like upside down and have others that are coming right side up. Sometimes universes will meet this way, other dimensions will meet like that. And there's also another good example of a lot of this material in the new Godzilla Kong movies, where you see like the Agarthan space, where it was like a dimensional like world within world. It's very similar to this. I've actually seen dimensions where you see like the buildings touching each other, or like how it's very similar, but they did this mechanically in Interstellar, where they had the space station they made at the end, where it was all round, where they had the houses upside down and such. It was I've seen planes like that where you have like buildings up here where gravity works in multiple directions and everything like that. It's actually quite interesting.
Yeah, well, that was the outer planes in D&D. There are some other ones like that are smaller. Mount Olympus is one of them, but they are not like the main ones, and you don't get to go to them. So,
Oh, okay. You only did the ones that people actually got to check out. Yeah.
yeah.
So, okay, let's see. We'll get to the channel portion here. Man. Sorry, folks that are listening to this, if my voice sounds strained. It's the result of a very bad cold that got around my vocal cords and decided to make me mute for a few days. So if it sounds strained, that's exactly one good place. So, like somebody choking you essentially. They didn't want us to do a show. We did a GIC episode about the Orion Codex yesterday, and that was what they were trying to prevent, and subsequently me doing shows like this as well. So, and doing channelings and such, because essentially, what do I need to do all that talk? So, who is actually here to speak? Okay, interesting. This is actually an interesting figure. Probably should just leave this cap off this bottle because my voice is actually starting to go a little bit. So, who's here again? Chrome is the one that wanted to talk. That's interesting because he's in one of those type of layers. He's a giant that's 150 feet tall and could literally shrink himself to like a regular human size coming here. But he's in a layer up, he's actually in Africa, up in the Atlas Mountains, but uh, in a different dimensional space that intersects that. Basically, he's saying, but you were just talking about Mount Olympus, it's essentially similar, where they would meet, it would meet a dimensional space. So, uh, Crumb, the last time I had a cold and you channeled, there was something funky that happened, so hopefully that doesn't happen again. Okay. Wait a second, just gotta get. So my throat is incredibly dry, so I gotta do this one more time. Ugh. You don't know how much that affects, but okay. Okay, Chrome. Through the there we go. Excuse, I was a wee bit concerned about uh doing this with him this evening, but this seems to be relatively okay. The topic that you are talking about these different realms and the different layers, he is correct. I do exist in one of these different layers, as does a rendition of Asgard, Atlantis, Lemuria, and several others within the intraverse. But also, there are also these other side juts, very much like you would see your Isle of Artaeum in your Skyrim. But there's also areas where, like what some insiders call like the eighth sphere, and places like that, where different Faustian pacts do originate. But very much like, say, here's an example you would know. Say, like in your Thieves Guild in your Skyrim, where where you are one of the Nightingales and you sign the contract with that particular goddess. What happens is you then go to the Everglow. In this instance, yes, if you were to sign a contract, that contract is a frequency that is anchored in a particular plane. You see, a Faustian contract is that is a particular manifestation of a plane or plane owning you, or at least having you as an indentured servitude. People hate when I and others bring up this subject because they think hell, they think they will die and go to a place. It doesn't completely work this way unless you've given yourself over to a particular dimensional space, unless it is a willing thing or even tricked willing, like not perceived tacit consent, but some kind of consent will get you into a place like this. Sometimes souls are stolen, like you have your soul trade, but this is slightly different. Not by much in some areas, but you have, say, you have Midgard. It is guarding the middle point. You have, say, you jumped into a portal to the next world over. It would look like another planet, but you would then see a different sky, even a different sun. You then you could go over to a different world and a different world. These are all within their own dimensional spaces. Some have their own stars, suns, moons, and no, Isaac, not the Lucky Charms. Thank you. But the truth be told, there are leprechauns and other elementals that go out of any of those spaces too. So he's not wrong completely. He's just being a little crude in that description. But I will just go straight into questions if you like.
Okay. Is the idea that like rivers and things run through multiple planes and can connect them accurate?
Yes, indeed it does, Ryan. There, say you have your river Styx, for instance, shown. Does that intersect multiple planes like you described? Absolutely. You had your Pijon, Gijon, Tigris, and Euphrates that was supposed to have the Garden of Eden, yes? Those all intersect different dimensional planes on different latitude and longitude of a dimensional standard. What a dimensional standard is, current moment in time, then added to a particular set of coordinates within the omniverse, super omniverse, interverse, or even multiverse, or like in your Stargate with the dial home device. It is very similar. If you were to dial a particular dimensional standard or gradient, let's say, and you were able to go via that bit of waterway, you would end up intersecting that bit of dimensional frequency if you could access that particular frequency. Or like in your Pirates of the Caribbean movies, where they went off the edge of the earth, so to speak, and went into a different dimensional space. This is how people got the world is flat, which of course it is not. But this is also where people got falling off the edge of the world thing, because they ended up in some of these other dimensional spaces via a flowing waterway. See.
Okay. Next question is there what is outside of these planes but not the real world?
Excuse again?
What is like in the space between these planes?
That would be the void dimension, where it's the spaces in between universes and dimensions. That is the dark matter void that holds this whole thing together. The Yggdrasil tree is planted firmly within the timelines, but then also has the void like a glue binding it together. This is what the Orions tore through when they tore through from their dark timeline, you see, and they caused an imbalance in the tree or spread a viral contagion. The void dimension is quite unique. Think of it as like not just a lifeblood, but it is actually, if you went there, you would see nothing. You would see a gray mass and ships going in between these spaces, very much like going into an underground or underwater cavern, and to going into different spots along the timelines and also different dimensional spaces from there. The beings that originate from there, he calls them the guardianship, but they have a different name. They use different names for different people sometimes, which is confusing. But I'm saying this to them because they can hear this. But what they did was they patched some of these cracks and doorways so that you had to pass through them to get to these different dimensions. They then delegate who can be in a different dimension at a different point in time. Very much like your nirvana, where it would destabilize. They are concerned about the very same thing, about destabilizing the nature of the world tree. So, say if a whole species came from another universe that was dying, they would be led via the void dimension into an appropriately compatible timeline and or dimension and or universe. This the guardianship took up this role because of the Orion's insurgency into the multiverse, and various other species have done similar things. So they had to basically put a guard at the drawbridge pretty much and say who goes there. This is essentially the void space is what binds all these spaces together.
Okay. Is there are the realms set up by like the kind of beings that are in them, or are they set up by the energy that they give off, and then as a result, there's multiple different types of beings in each dimension?
It is actually both, Ryan. Where it's compatible to the frequency and a being that inhabit, then others will inhabit those realms with them based on basically the frequency and the dimensional standard that they can exist in. Very much like a saltwater fish goes into saltwater, freshwater fish, freshwater, birds in the sky, and a person can be on the ground, or also a mammal in the woods or on the ground. You get the idea, yes.
Yes. And are there neutral planes where all beings interact?
Yes, there are neutral planes, very much like you saw the center area. That's exactly how it is. He has not known this, but in his near-death experience, he was actually in that middle neutral space in a wooded area where myself and others were interacting with him via the omniverse and super omniverse, or where oversouls and spirit realm combined with everything else within the Yggdrasil tree. The void combines and the spirit world goes up and around and through as well. One could call that the lifeblood as well, but the neutral space is that space between spirit realm, omniverse, super omniverse, multiverse. It's all in between. Now you have spaces that are also on the edge of multiverse and omniverse and super omniverse. These are essentially like how the TVA was in your Loki program, where you could see the sacred timeline and the spaces outside of all of that. The neutral space in between is where any being can walk into, but no one can wage war with each other. Like if you have other factions from other timelines that want to wage war, if they try it in there, they get the living crap beat out of them, you see.
Okay, no further questions.
I thank you. I limit his speech because of his throat inconsistencies, but my energy matrices tends to wreak havoc on some of any viral contagions he has in him at the time. So I thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, he's not wrong. The last time he spoke, and I had this similar issue to this, some things started going haywire. That's what he was concerned about. But his energy matrix is very, or the way his energy is laid out, is very different than a human, even though he looks human. It's because he can grow and shrink, essentially, given the frequency that he taps into. It's kind of like in the old show Super Friends, where you had like the Apache chief and Gigantor that could raise and grow and shrink. Torian Kal, my Oversoul component, could do the same thing. Titan form is essentially what they are. And also different land masses like the Atlas Mountains. That would be essentially the remains of Atlas himself. So some of them turned to stone and turned to elemental forms. So he sounds, you could hear his accent a little bit, even with my raspy voice. He has a Scandinavian sounding accent. If you actually heard him. He on Atlantis, he was using the language of Atlantean, the Atlantean High Council and everything. The closest language we have to original Atlantis or Atlantean is Futhark, or the Scandinavian language of Futhark. So is the closest one, pronunciation wise to and visually to Atlantis. So and Odin's original and Asgardian language. So I don't know if you have anything else to add, Ryan, before we take this one out.
No, I'm ready to take this one out.
Okay. So thank you everybody for watching this show. I know I sound strange. Apologize for that, but it couldn't be helped at this time. So we had to delay this show a few days because I was on mute pretty much. So if you enjoyed this show, thank you very much. Subscribe to this channel. You will see it in two places for a little bit. You'll see it on the YouTube and on the video game Rumble channel that I've recently set up. So I now close this circle within true benevolence and no conflicting agendas at this moment in time. So thank you, everybody. Bye-bye now.
See ya.